I'm sure by now you've heard about the temporary ban on Apple not being able to sell their Series 9 and Ultra 2 watch models. As a certified supply chain professional, when I saw this news item, I immediately put on my supply chain management thinking cap. What are the supply chain implications for this ban?
You and I get away from here, Tokyo, Dubai, or the roads, yeah. Spending all our money like we're billionaires. Holiday lies, holiday lies.
For those of you who are not aware of the background to the story, let me try to summarize what has happened to Apple. So essentially, there's a company called Massimo that claims to have a patent on measuring the blood oxygen levels through their patented hardware. Now, they claim that Apple had approached them initially to incorporate their technology into the Apple Watch.
It was 2013 when they contacted me and said, we're the platinum of non-invasive monitoring. They want us to go in, meet with them because they want to integrate our technology. We have not heard from them. Instead, they ended up recruiting 25 of my engineers, including our chief medical officer and CTO from a spin-off company.
The allegations purportedly states that Apple, after meeting Massimo, poached about more than 20 of their engineers to join the Apple Watch team, and then they went ahead to develop the blood oxygen levels technology, which Massimo claims that there is some copyright infringement. One other interesting bit of this whole allegation is that Apple then registered a patent in the name of one of the engineers who was poached from Massimo. So there's this whole tussle and there's this whole hubbub between Apple and Massimo. And the Massimo CEO is not willing to budge in, and he's kind of pushing this to, the best of his abilities to kind of protect the intellectual property of his company. So after 3 years of legal battles, Massimo then approaches ITC, the US International Trade Commission, and they petitioned the ITC to place a ban on the sale of Apple Watches in the US, and this actually went through. They won the case with the ITC, and so there was a temporary ban on these two models, the Series 9 and Ultra 2 models of the Apple Watch in the US. Now, the ban specifically states that Apple cannot import, let's say, new batches or consignment of these two models into the US until this matter is resolved. There are a myriad of issues that we can glean from this whole situation. Of course, there is the direct impact on Apple stock. So the Apple stock took a tumble when this whole ban took effect. But from a supply chain point of view, there are three key things that I would want to point out that, maybe you may not have thought about. So number one is that every company or every supply chain team would usually have a forecast. Remember that the demand forecast that you have for your product would also have direct impact on the sales targets for the commercial team. There's a barrage of law cases that are raised against Apple every single year, and none of them has actually resulted in a ban of any of their product. And so what this means is that it is likely that the supply chain team did not probably forecast that there was going to be a ban, or did not anticipate that there was going to be a ban on these two SKUs. So normally when you're assessing risk, you're looking at the probability and the impact matrix. It is most likely when this whole case began 3 years ago, there was the potential that in the impact and probability matrix, this ban, was probably low somewhere. And so if they did not anticipate, coming back to my point number one, that means that there's going to be a direct impact on the forecasted volumes that they were expecting to ship from their manufacturing plants in China. One of the things that you think about as a supply chain professional would be, what are my contingency plans, right? So does Apple have some safety stock somewhere, in the warehouses in the US, US being their largest market? If they have safety stock, if they have some buffer stock, then ideally they would be able to respond to the demand in the market. But I can tell for sure that because of the high demand for Apple Watches, I mean, this is like a $17 billion market that Apple is dominating. So definitely I think that there's going to be some impact on the direct sales of these two SKUs in the US. So the number 2 point that comes to mind as a supply chain professional is, what is the SOS call? I mean, what is actually the emergency call that a supply chain team would have to implement? Now, what a supply chain actually does essentially is that we try to manage demand and supply. It's called smoothing, right? We try to smooth demand and supply to ensure that the demand that is coming in from the customers in a way matches our capacity to deliver or to produce whatever is being demanded. So there's this constant smoothing, as we call it. There's this constant alignment of demand and supply. So I can already tell within the supply chain team at Apple, I can already anticipate that they will try to work with the commercial team to, in a way, control demand. So an example is that Apple immediately on the website took down the ability to order for these two SKUs. So that is a contingency plan. That is a plan to manage demand, right? So it means that if you went to the Apple website during the period of the ban, you cannot see these two SKUs on the website for you to even place an order, which is a very, let's say, pragmatic way to manage or control the demand that is coming in. Another short-term solution would be obviously that in the marketing materials that Apple has, they would try as much as possible to either remove these two SKUs, these two watch models from all their marketing materials, and they will not try to promote it, because then the more you promote, the more you are essentially asking customers to demand for that product. So that for me is something that it's a no-brainer. In the short term, that is definitely something that Apple has done, and they did actually do that during the period of the ban. So yeah, that makes sense from a supply chain point of view. For a medium-term solution, one of the things that I can think about is buffer stock, or having some safety stock. And this is crucial. The reason why companies keep safety stock is that there's always variability in demand. This ban, for example, it's one of the low probability, high impacts kind of thing that happens, right? And for it happening, it means that Apple should have some safety stock, because the ban prevents or prohibited Apple from importing new stock into the US. So if they had enough stock, then that should be fine. And so this kind of brings in mind, and I can already anticipate that there would be some medium-term solution to revisit safety stock settings within the Apple supply chain team. They will be thinking, okay, look, in the event that this should happen again in the future, we should be prepared. And in preparing for that, Apple would want to probably look at their safety stock settings or policies around their safety stock and buffer stock in order to respond to these variabilities in demand. So if Apple, let's say, has a good logistics kind of policy or logistics relationship with their LSPs or 3PLs, what that would mean essentially is that they could technically import as much of the product into the US before the ban takes effect, right? So if you have a very streamlined supply chain, you have distribution centers, that are closer to the United States, right? So in this case, Apple probably would think about a term we call near shoring, right? So currently Apple is basically doing offshoring, where the essential assembly and manufacturing of the Apple Watch is done either by Foxconn or any of their suppliers in China. Apple would think maybe in the medium to long term to do near shoring, right, where they would probably bring these unique capabilities either back home or closer to the United States. That would be a policy that ordinarily, from a purely theoretical point of view, without knowing the details, Apple would probably consider doing this. The number 3 point that I can think about is that of due diligence, right? So sometimes what happens is that there are gray areas when it comes to patented technologies. And so companies try to find very clever ways to circumvent and circumnavigate these patent laws or some of the technologies. And yeah, sometimes it just doesn't cut it, right? So for me, from a long-term point of view, I think this goes beyond even the supply chain team at Apple, but then Apple would have to do a lot more due diligence when it comes to looking at the technologies. And if the allegations are true that Apple indeed poached the key engineers from Massimo, then that is also something that Apple would have to take a look at, so it doesn't recur in the future. Another short-term solution that Apple could probably explore would be to just settle with Massimo, right? So in an interview with the CEO of Massimo, the president and CEO of the company expressed the possibility of they settling if Apple approached them and they kind of had some form of gentleman's agreement and, they settled. So that in the short term, that could be a very pragmatic way to kind of address the situation in order to kind of resume Apple's capability or ability to sell the Ultra 2 and the Series 9 Apple Watches in the US.
Spending all our money like we're billionaires. Holiday lights,